So we are here at Robert Amos' studio, uh, talking about his new book, E.J. Hughes Paints Vancouver Island. Robert is a multidisciplinary artist. He paints, he writes, he interviews artists. For the longest time he was writing in a newspaper, a local newspaper. And Robert, tell me, when do you start writing books?
Well, writing books was a natural outgrowth of writing for the newspaper. I began writing art reviews in 1982 as a way to try to make a living. Mostly painting pictures is what I do, but it's hard to make a living doing that. So I began contributing freelance articles, and in 1986 was hired by the daily newspaper, the Times Colonist, to do a review every week. And so I go and interview the most interesting artists I could find and see all the art shows. This went on for 32 years. And in the process of doing that, I found I got so much more from the artists I was interviewing than I could possibly fit in my newspaper story. I began photographing the artists' studios. As an artist myself, really their life and practice was an open book to me if I could see where they worked, what sort of materials they used, how neat they were, all these kind of things. You could tell that in a photograph. So these photographs accumulated over the years, and they became my first book with Touchwood editions called Artists in Their Studios. It's about 33 different artists of Victoria and of southern Vancouver Island. So, you know, really, I think in terms of books. When I have an idea, generally it involves more than one picture, a whole sequence of pictures. And the pictures need some kind of explanation. It involves words and writing, and the combination of the words and the pictures, well, that seems to be how I think about things.
And now, about this book, the latest book. What decided you to make a book about this particular artist?
I've been a great fan of Hughes since I arrived in Victoria in 1975. I discovered one of his paintings at the time at the University of Victoria, painting of Ladysmith Harbour. I thought, wow, this is a really wonderful realist painting of this beautiful place. And if you remember 1975, there were no realist paintings. It was all abstract at the time. So I became interested in him, and as I began writing about his artwork. And one day he had his assistant call me and invite my wife and I out for lunch. And I got to know the man from a polite distance, but such an interesting person. So I always maintained an interest in him right up until the time of his death in 2007. Now, Hughes had a helper, a woman named Pat Salmon. Pat was a neighbor of his at Shawnigan Lake. She's the mother of 7, and her husband was alive too. She was a very busy woman, but she was interested in art history. And one day she asked Hughes if she could write a story about him. And he decided then and there, in 1977, that she would be his biographer. So he gave her all of the material he had saved, his clipping files and photo albums, and she continued interviewing him and writing about him and taking notes of things and photographing his artwork, and eventually driving him around, taking his clothes to the cleaners, helping him buy his groceries, and also answering the telephone and his correspondence and keeping people from bothering him. Because Hughes had a technique for painting which involved an enormous amount of concentration. And he found even if the phone rang or the doorbell rang, it would put him off his his meditation of his painting, and he might lose a whole afternoon's work just because someone called the wrong number. Pat was extremely helpful to him. Hughes died in 2007, and Pat would have continued with her work towards writing the book on Hughes, but she has Parkinson's disease and is physically incapable of the work necessary to bring all this material to resolution. So one day in 2012, she called me and she said, I'm wondering if you would accept the task. I would like you to be Hughes' biographer.
Oh, wow.
And she made available to me all of the remarkable material she had collected about this reclusive artist. And with her encouragement, and eventually the support of the estate of E.J. Hughes, I was able to create this book.
Do you have any text that you can read about in the book that might be kind of interesting?
Sure.
Well, all the text probably is interesting.
I'm sure all the text is interesting, but one thing that I used as the, right near the first opening page of the book, is a quotation that Hughes made in 1961. The CBC television came to make a television program about him. It's about 4 or 5 minutes long, and they made it in Shawnigan Lake. And at one point in the film, he's describing one of his paintings and how people sometimes confuse it with photorealism, but he did not paint from photographs. He painted from careful drawings that he made. And he went on to say, one of the main reasons I paint is because I think nature is so wonderful that I want to try to get my feeling down about that on canvas, if possible. I feel that when I'm doing my painting, it is a form of worship.
Wow.
And you know, it occurs to me that Emily Carr did her paintings as a form of worship too. I mean, Emily wasn't selling much, but she kept on painting. It was how she got in touch with the world, with nature, with the powers beyond the simple mundane facts of life. And the connection between Hughes and Emily Carr is very direct, really. Because Emily Carr had only one successful exhibition in her life. It took place in 1944 in Montreal at the Dominion Gallery. She was really surprised. They borrowed 59 of her paintings and they sold 46 of them. This in the last days of the Second World War in Montreal. Anyway, she would have built on that success and had another show, but she died 6 months later. The owner of the Dominion Gallery, though, was able to become the representative of the estate of Emily Carr, which Lauren Harris was handling. And he put on further exhibitions from the Emily Carr estate. And with the money that was received for selling her paintings, Lauren Harris created a scholarship in her name, the Emily Carr Scholarship. And it was given to Hughes in 1947, one of the very first recipients. And Hughes used that money to travel up the coast of Vancouver Island, and it was really the basis for his career, the sketching and studies he made then. So his career was built on money received from Emily Carr's paintings. Also, the owner of the Dominion Gallery, who was in contact with Lauren Harris, came out to visit him in Vancouver in 1951. And I'm sure he said on that day, Mr. Harris, that worked out really well with Emily Carr. Have you got any other artists to recommend? And Lauren Harris recommended Hughes. So Stern came to Vancouver Island to look for Hughes. It took him a couple of days to find him at Shawnigan Lake in a cottage with really no running water, certainly no telephone. Hughes didn't have a car. It was just in the woods. But Stern came in and looked around, and he said, "I like what you do. I'd like to buy it all." And he bought the contents of Hughes' studio then and there. It was a few weeks later when he said to his wife, "Wasn't that wonderful? He really saved our bacon buying all those paintings." And his wife said, "Ed, you don't understand. He wants to buy it all. You just send it to him and he'll send you the money." And that's exactly what happened. From 1951 until Stern died in 1988, and it continued until the gallery in Montreal closed in the year 2000. They bought absolutely everything Hughes created. And they sold it right away to the National Gallery, the Beaverbrook, the Art Gallery of Ontario, the Department of Foreign Affairs. Hughes' paintings are treasured by the finest collections in this country. During his lifetime, one of them sold for more than $1 million at auction in 2004. In 2016, one of his paintings from 1949, a painting of the main street of Courtenay, sold for $1.6 million. So he's a very highly regarded artist, but because of his reclusive nature, he's not very well known. He never showed up to the opening of an art exhibition of his, and he tried to avoid interviews of all sorts. Also, the fact that his work, while it is predominantly paintings of southern Vancouver Island, all of them were sold in Montreal. And so the people here don't really know his work as well as they ought to, even though it's about the things we know well.
Now, what's coming next after this book?
Well, I'm at work now on the next book, which will be called E.J. Hughes Paints British Columbia. It begins with his work as a student in Vancouver, follows him up the coast where he was a commercial fisherman, and then between 1956 and 1967, he traveled throughout the interior of British Columbia, painting all the different regions. So that's the next book. After that, if I'm able, I will create the book called E.J. Hughes, the War Artist, because he was the first Canadian war artist in World War II. He was the longest serving of all the war artists, and he created the largest body of work of any of them. There's more than 1,600 of his artworks in the Canadian War Museum. If I can do all that, then I'd like to sit down and write a character study, the biography of E.J. Hughes, because he was a remarkable man and a very good example.
So we will have lots of art from him.
Yeah, you'll have the whole shelf.
Okay. So about the book, where we can find the book, where
well, the book is so easy to find. Touchwood Editions has a wonderful distribution. This book's in all the bookstores. It's in the BC ferries, in the national parks, gift shops. It's so you'll see it at all the stores.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. I look forward to visiting with you when the next book comes out. This is a painting of the Coxsackie River at Cowichan Bay. So, first of all, I spent a long time talking about Pat, and there's a picture of Pat holding one of his paintings. Can you get that? Okay. So, what else? So I'm showing you. Here's a picture of Hughes. What did I do? I guess that's too small to see. That's him standing in front of his house. Well, let's do a picture of him. This one. Okay. Now, what did I talk about? I could show you a picture of
Do you have a picture of the war paintings that he did?
Yes.
This one.
A picture of Vancouver. Wartime, 1942 in the south of England. He sure could draw.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is just drawn by somebody sitting on the side of the road too. This is not copied from a photograph or anything. He just sat there and drew. Good guy. This is the contract, by the way. I mean, it is such a remarkable thing in Canadian art history. I thought I should just put it down in full. As a picture of the three of us in 1996.
You were in the bay.
Yep. My Hudson Bay coat.
Hudson Bay. Nice.
Nice warm coat, that one.
Good.
This is, you might like to take a picture of this while I'm here. This is the map.
That you were talking about.
Yeah, and it's the index for the book, really. It starts off at Sydney and then follows them all the way along. So that's the order of the pictures in the book. This painting belongs to the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria. Taylor Bay on Gabriola Island.